In the year 260, the most powerful man on earth got down on his hands and knees so a Persian king could step on his back and mount a horse. That man was Valerian, Emperor of Rome, and legend says that when he died in captivity, his skin was flayed, dyed red, stuffed with straw, and hung in a temple as a trophy. Rome's historians could barely bring themselves to write it down. Some spun it, some skipped it entirely. But the Persians knew Rome would lie. So they carved the truth into the side of a mountain, and it's still there. This is the story of how a Roman emperor became a footstool, and why Rome tried to forget. To understand how an emperor ends up in chains, you have to understand that by 200 to 60 AD, Rome was not the Rome of legend. Historians call this period the crisis of the 3rd century, and crisis is generous. In 50 years, Rome burned through more than 20 emperors, most of them murdered by their own soldiers. The currency was collapsing. Tribes were punching through the northern frontiers. And a pandemic, the plague of Cyprian, was tearing through the empire. Ancient sources claim that at its peak, 5,000 people were dying every day in the city of Rome alone. The empire was a wounded animal, and in the east, something was rising that Rome did not understand. In 224 AD, a Persian nobleman named Ardashir overthrew the Parthian dynasty that had ruled Iran for 4 centuries. Rome barely blinked. As far as Roman generals were concerned, Persia was Persia. Horse archers who shoot and run away. An annoyance. A tax on doing business in the East. That assumption was about to cost them an emperor, because the Sassanids were not the Parthians. This was a centralized state. It had a professional bureaucracy, a state religion, imperial ambition, and a new kind of army. Not just swarms of light horsemen, but cataphracts, rider and horse sheathed together in armor from head to hoof. Shock cavalry, a medieval knight 1,000 years early. And behind the cavalry came engineers with siege towers, battering rams, and tunnels. That was the one thing steppe raiders never had. The Sassanids could take walled cities. Ardashir's son inherited all of it. His name was Shapur, and he would spend his reign collecting Roman emperors. Emperor number 1, Gordian III. In 244, the young emperor marched a massive army down the Euphrates to crush the upstart dynasty. At a place called Misich, Shapur smashed it. Gordian never came home. The Persian account says he was killed in the battle. The Roman account says he died afterward, possibly murdered by his own Praetorian prefect. Notice already the 2 versions of history splitting apart. It's a pattern. Remember it. Emperor number 2, Philip the Arab. He was the prefect in question. Stranded deep in enemy territory with a beaten army, Philip bought his way home. 500,000 denarii paid to Shapur for safe passage. Rome called it a settlement. Shapur called it tribute, and renamed the battlefield Peroz Shapur. Victorious is Shapur. Then Shapur came west. At Barbalissos in Syria, he met the Roman field army, 60,000 men if the Persian account is to be believed, and annihilated it. The gates of the Roman East swung open. Shapur's own inscription lists the cities that fell, dozens of them, including the crown jewel, Antioch, the 3rd largest city in the Roman Empire. Ancient sources disagree on exactly how many times and in what order he took it, but they agree on the most vivid detail. One surprise attack came so fast that an audience in Antioch's theater only realized the Persians had arrived when a pair of actors broke character and shouted that the city had fallen. Valerian himself later retook the city and made it his headquarters, before losing it again in the same run of campaigns that ended with his own capture. And then there's Dura Europos, a Roman fortress on the Euphrates. When Shapur's army besieged it around 256, they didn't circle the walls with horse archers and hope. They mined underneath them. The Roman defenders countermined, and in one cramped tunnel, archaeologists found the remains of about 20 soldiers piled where they fell. The excavator's forensic reconstruction suggests Persian sappers pumped the tunnel full of choking sulfur and bitumen fumes. If that reconstruction holds, it makes Dura Europos the earliest hard evidence of chemical warfare in human history. A field army wiped out, a great city taken and retaken, and a siege tunnel turned into a gas chamber. That is not what horse archers who shoot and run away looks like. Rome's intelligence was 20 years out of date. and the bill was coming due. Enter Emperor number 3, Valerian. He took the throne in 253, a respected senator in his 60s in an age when emperors were mostly warlords. He was serious, experienced, and he understood the scale of the Persian threat, so he split the empire's command in half. His son Gallienus would hold the west, while Valerian himself marched east to face Shapur. For a few years it held, then the plague found his army. The same pandemic ravaging the empire's cities tore through the legions in Syria. By 260, with Shapur pressing the fortress city of Edessa, Valerian scraped together everything he had. The Persian record claims 70,000 men, drawn from across the empire, and marched to break the siege, somewhere between Karhai and Edessa, near the same cursed ground where Crassus had lost his legions to Persia 3 centuries earlier. Valerian's weakened army was surrounded. What happened next depends on who you ask, and by now you know that matters. Roman writers, salvaging what dignity they could, said Valerian went to negotiate and was treacherously seized at the parley. Shapur's own inscription tells it differently and bluntly. Valerian Caesar came against us with 70,000 men, and we, with our own hand, took him captive. However it happened, the result was the same. The Emperor of Rome, along with his Praetorian prefect, senators, officers, and the remnants of an entire field army, marched into Persia in chains. In 1,000 years of Roman history, through every disaster from Cannae to Karhai, no reigning emperor had ever been taken alive by a foreign enemy. Valerian was the first. In the ancient empire, he would also be the last. So, what do you do with a captive emperor? Here the record splits again, and this time you need to know who's holding the pen. The most famous version comes from Lactantius, a Christian writer working about half a century later. And Lactantius had an axe to grind. Valerian had launched one of the bloodiest persecutions of Christians in Roman history, executing bishops, including Cyprian, the very man the plague was named for. To Lactantius, Valerian's fate was divine justice, and he wrote it that way. In his telling, whenever Shapur wanted to mount his horse, Valerian, still dressed in imperial purple, was forced down on all fours so the King of Kings could step on his back. And when Valerian finally died in captivity, Lactantius says, Shapur had him flayed, his skin dyed red, stuffed with straw, and displayed in a Persian temple, so that every Roman envoy who came to negotiate would do so standing in front of the previous management. Is it true? We can't prove it. Persian sources never mention it, and Lactantius is about as hostile a witness as exists. This may be a persecuted Christian's revenge fantasy dressed up as history. But the story stuck, because even Romans found it believable. That's the thing about humiliation. It only spreads if people can picture it. What we can verify is arguably stranger. The tens of thousands of Roman soldiers captured with Valerian weren't massacred. They were used. Shapur deported them into Persia and put them to work as builders and engineers. At Shushtar, in modern Iran, there still stands the ruin of a massive Roman-style dam and bridge that Persian tradition calls Band-e-Kaisar, the Dam of Caesar. Built, the tradition says, by Valerian's captured legionaries. Shapur even founded a new royal city, settled with Roman captives, whose Persian name translates roughly to better than Antioch. Shapur built this. Think about what that means. Rome's ultimate weapon was now pouring stone for the King of Kings, the legion, the engineering, the discipline itself. Whether or not Valerian's skin ever hung in a temple, his army spent its final years building monuments for the enemy. Now for the strangest part of this story, the silence. An emperor of Rome was captured, enslaved, and died in enemy hands. This should be one of the most exhaustively documented events in Roman history. Instead, the Roman sources are thin, evasive, and contradictory. A few embarrassed lines here, a face-saving legend there. No army marched to rescue Valerian, no ransom is recorded. His own son Gallienus, now sole emperor, made remarkably little recorded effort to get his father back. Rome didn't just lose Valerian, Rome dropped the subject, and you can understand why. The entire imperial project ran on a simple story. Rome always wins. Defeats are temporary. Vengeance is inevitable. An emperor kneeling in Persian dust broke the operating system. So the Roman pen did what pens do. It minimized, it spun, it looked away. But Shapur had anticipated exactly this. He didn't trust paper. Paper can be edited, copied selectively, quietly lost. So at Naqsh-e Rostam, the sacred cliff where the ancient Persian kings were buried, Shapur commissioned his own version in the most permanent medium available, the mountain itself. There, carved into the rock, Shapur sits on horseback in full royal glory. Standing before him, his wrist locked in the king's grip, the Persian gesture of capture, is the Emperor Valerian. Kneeling beside him, hands outstretched, begging for peace, the Emperor Philip. Two Roman emperors on a single panel, one captive, one on his knees. And nearby, on the walls of a stone tower, Shapur inscribed his official record of the wars in 3 languages: Middle Persian, Parthian, and Greek, the language Rome's elites could read. That last choice is the whole game. This was a message addressed to Rome. We know you'll lie about this. Here is the truth, at a scale you can't burn. 17 centuries later, scholars have to reconstruct the Roman version from fragments. Shapur's version, you can stand in front of it today. Step back, and the capture of Valerian is more than history's greatest humiliation. It's the moment the ancient world became a two-superpower world, whether Rome admitted it or not. For centuries, Rome told itself it had no equals, only barbarians of varying sizes. The Sassanids shattered that premise. Here was an empire with a tax system, a state church, a chancery issuing trilingual propaganda, heavy cavalry that could break legions in the open field, and engineers who could crack fortress cities. Rome's response tells you everything. In the generations after Edessa, it rebuilt its army around mobile cavalry and eventually fielded armored horsemen of its own, copied in part from the enemy it refused to name. Shapur didn't get to savor the moment for long. As his armies rolled home heavy with loot, a Roman allied prince from the desert city of Palmyra, Odenathus, mauled his columns at the Euphrates and clawed back the Roman East. The war ground on. It never stopped. Rome and Persia would hammer each other for another 400 years, two exhausted giants until a new power out of Arabia swallowed one whole and took half of the other. But the precedent of 260 stood forever. Rome could bleed. Rome could kneel. And everyone on both sides of the Euphrates had seen it. History is written by whoever holds the pen, not the winners. And for most of the ancient world, the pen was Roman. That's why your mental image of Persia is a horse archer running away. The losers wrote the textbook. But once, the other side got the last word, because they refused to trust the page at all. Rome answered its greatest defeat with ink. Shapur answered with stone. 1,700 years later, the ink has faded, the excuses are footnotes, and 2 emperors of Rome are still up on that mountainside in Iran, one begging, one captive, exactly where Shapur left them.